Hi folks, Joseph Kursky here with you to talk about how to download and use or stream data from several New Zealand portals. This is in support of the 10 public domain data exercises on spatialreserves.wordpress.com. We are going to go through a couple of data portals and either stream or download those so you'll get an idea of how to do that. So for example, we're looking at the data.gov.nz or NZ, New Zealand. We're looking at a couple of different layers here. Look, we can explore the resources that are on their metadata pages. We can download many of these. We can stream some of these. It's a good idea to, even though I'm giving it short shrift in this video, to pay attention to the metadata. Where did the data come from? How often is it updated? What scale is it created at? What projection is it in? And so on. That's very important when you're using geospatial data to make a decision, either in education as these lessons guide you through, or in a outside of education, real life decision making mode. So I'm looking at the export options here. I've got a geodatabase. I can download a shapefile and some other formats. I'm going to go ahead and accept the terms. Again, it's important to read the terms. Can you use it in an educational setting? Can you use it for commercial purposes? It's important to pay attention to all that. Now I'm downloading the data, and I'm going to give a couple of seconds here while this is downloading to talk about what you do with this once you download it. First of all, it's important to give these things relevant names, and it's also important to know where you're storing them on your local device and or in the cloud. Some of these services and data sets do not work if you're in the cloud, but increasingly as GIS becomes more of the embracing the cloud platform, you can store these things. Occasionally you'll have issues with raster data in the cloud in certain path names, whether it's on Google Drive or somewhere else, with spaces in the name. In my case, I've got dashes, so I'm good there, but I always avoid spaces in names. Sometimes that's not possible because you're using some cloud-based service that actually has a space in the name, like my folder, my space folder. I'm going to store it here on my local device, and I'm going to put it in an area that I know where it is, I know what the name of it is, and I can find it later on. That's very important in GIS because GIS is complicated enough. There's a lot of bits and pieces, data, services, tools, ways to share. And so what you want to do is be organized about your project. You just want to be organized. Don't make the mistake of sort of naming things, oh, test 1, test 2, Monday test, Tuesday test, because you'll have a whole bunch of files and data sets at some point in the future, and that'll be really confusing to you as you move forward. So here I've got this data set, and I'm looking at the map projection. That's really important when you're using geospatial data. Here, my focus is New Zealand, so I'm going to use the New Zealand Transverse Mercator, which is the data projection that it's in right now. I'm going to accept these terms and download that spatial data. So again, be organized about where your data is located on your device or in a cloud-based storage area. Know what your project name is, know the data characteristics, and if it's suitable to meet your needs. Oftentimes, geospatial data is in zipped format, so you'll need to unzip it as I'm doing here. I'm going to show my zip file now, and then I'm going to place it in the folder where my other data sets associated with this particular project. And by the way, this is one of the lessons in the public domain data set of 10 projects and 10 lessons that you can actually go through. This one is focused on creating an ecotourism map of New Zealand. So we're focused on New Zealand here, but really these procedures that I'm outlining really apply to any single data source. Now notice here that it's giving me an error that I can't write into this. This is because I actually have this open inside ArcGIS Pro. So that's actually a good lesson in itself, that you need to maybe put it in a different folder as I just did here, and that way I've got write access. And now I've got my unzipped files. I've got some geodatabases, I've got some shape files which contain, of course, DBS, SHPs, projection information, SHX files, which link the geometry and the table together. A bunch of files associated with this particular layer. Now, some layers will have 1 or 2 files associated with them. Other layers will have multiple files, even more than 10 files associated with just this one layer. So now I'm going to go ahead and start a new map, and I'm going to go ahead and find that data. So now I'm going to go ahead and say map and then add data. And I know where it is, so I know that it's on my device. And again, I've got to navigate to that place where the data is stored. So here I've got my folder. Notice I couldn't see it. So there's that little circle symbol where I had to refresh the folder name. So if you've just added something to your folder and you don't see it listed there when you go ahead and add data, that's a very important kind of a source of confusion oftentimes. Why don't I see my data? I just put it there. So do a refresh on that folder to make sure that ArcGIS Pro, for example, here knows where your data is. And now I'm starting to examine my data. I can symbolize it, I can filter it, I can join attributes to other tables. There's lots of things I can do with it, and probably most importantly, I can start analyzing things. Where are the different land covers associated with certain land uses, for example? Where are certain slopes related to certain land covers? What is this land use like near coastlines or near national parks or state parks or provincial parks, etc. So I've got a lot of data at my fingertips just with that one layer here, again, that we got from one of the New Zealand data portals. Wonderful. And this is, of course, in the New Zealand transverse Mercator projection, which is a good one for New Zealand. That's what a lot of the country's data is in. And I can examine the attributes, so I get familiar with my data that I've just brought in. I hope that was instructive. We're going to go through a couple of other data portals right now. This particular one is the conservation data portal. Notice that there's a whole bunch of items on there, metadata, mission of the agency. But what you want to do is you want to get to the data, actually the data itself, whether you can either stream it or download it. Spatial data is what we're seeking here. I've got Kea habitat, so from the bird atlas data. So I'm going to go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to filter whatever I'm searching for on feature service. That's a streaming data service. This particular layer that I'm interested in is not available as a streaming service. When is it better to use a streaming service or you actually download the data? It depends on your needs. Increasingly, data is served as data services, which means you don't actually have to download it, but in this case, we're actually going to download it. We're going to take a look at the layer here, and many of these data portals, especially if they're in ArcGIS Hub, will allow you to view it while you're or before you're downloading it or before you're streaming it, for example, inside ArcGIS Online. So we're going to go ahead and view this data here, again looking at the metadata page, but also there's oftentimes with these hub sites and other services you can get the URL for this. So if we said add data from a path, and if we paste that URL for the service, let's see if we can go ahead and add that to our ArcGIS Pro session or project. Let's go ahead and zoom to layer, and let's see if we can see that. Oh, okay, it's on the South Island. This particular bird is only on the South Island, it looks like, so that's why we didn't see it when we were just zoomed in on the North Island. So there's that habitat. Again, I've got that streaming from that data portal. The land use, I've got it downloaded. It's on my device, but the Kea habitat, it is actually streamed in. Again, what is best, streaming or download? Sometimes the size of the data, you might want to actually have a copy of it on your local device if it's too slow to draw. But in this case, that was just one layer there, and so that was just fine to stream. So lots of considerations that are beyond the scope of this. Now we've brought in one layer downloaded, and we've also streamed in one layer. Now mesh blocks. This is a good instruction for other things that we might want to talk about here. This has to do with, so it's actually the geometry for the demographic data from the New Zealand National Census, population, housing, etc. So these are the mesh blocks, which correspond to census tracts or block groups in other countries or statistical areas, and they go by various names all over the world if they have a national census. But here in New Zealand, they're called mesh blocks. And in this case, I've got several different resolutions of those mesh blocks. I can look at the generalized, and we can look at the metadata to find out how big of an area it is. Is it a neighborhood? Is it a town? What is the size of that? And if we didn't get it generalized, it probably is at a higher resolution, is my suspicion here. So in this case, we're going to download the generalized mesh blocks from the 2018 National Census. And once again, we're going to actually cut it from the downloaded folder default on my device, which is in the downloads folder, probably is on yours, but every computer is different depending on how you set it up. So now I'm going to go ahead and copy it, actually move it to the place where I have the other data in my project. And let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to put it in the same folder as my other data that we were looking at, and now I've got it pasted in there. Great, now I'm going to unzip it. Again, most geospatial data is composed of several files, and they also are composed of large files, so it's always, well, oftentimes it is zipped when you download it. So you need to unzip it, and again, unzip it into an area that you'll be able to find later on and keep things organized. Okay, so now we've got those mesh blocks. Let's go ahead and extract it here, and we'll get several files. Now we'll take a look at what we've got here, mesh blocks in this folder here. And this is a geodatabase, so we've got several files inside that geodatabase. Since it's a geodatabase now, we can go back to our ArcGIS Pro session, and we can say, let's go ahead and add data, and it's on my local device, so it's that very first choice there. And now I'm going to go to my folder, and again, I'm going to hit that refresh button. As we talked about a minute or so ago, there's that refresh button, and now I can see that I've got a file geodatabase in there. Okay, so we've got inside that file geodatabase, we have a data layer in there. What is it? It is the geometry for pouring your census data into. Think of it as the sort of the muffin tins, and the census data itself, the demographics, the population, the housing units, etc., are the batter that goes into those muffin tins. Maybe that's an imperfect analogy, but I like to think of it that way. So these are the containers inside which your census data will be joined later on. Right now, it's just the geometry. It's got the codes that correspond to the housing and population census data. We're not going to spend time in this particular video to download the census data, but what you will do is you will join that census data, or national statistics data if you prefer that term, to the blocks, block groups, census tracts. In this case, of course, they're called mesh blocks. So we're going to look at the fields view. When we're going to join the data probably later on, we're going to use this MB 2018 V100 code. It probably is the code we're going to use in there. But we've got the geometry now that we can start mapping census or national statistics data later on. And again, we're downloading that from the variety of portals. Now let's take a look at some raster data. For example, DEM data, digital elevation model data. Oftentimes this is obtained in the older days from topographic maps, which were, of course, generated from a combination of field surveys and aerial photos that were stereo compiled. But nowadays, more often, it's created from LiDAR data or even UAVs or drone data. There's a variety of ways that the DEMs are created. They were also created for a number of years by the Shuttle Radar Topography mission, so space shuttle data, and converted into these digital elevation models. DEMs are useful for a wide variety of purposes. Anytime you care about slope and aspect, directional slope, elevation, for fire towers or line of sight studies, wildfires, other kinds of natural hazards, the DEMs are going to be important. So some of these blocks of data are quite large, and so it's going to take a while. You'll need to be patient if you're actually downloading these. And according to this Land Information New Zealand data service for the LiDAR data, you cannot stream it at the present time. Keep your knees bent. Things change. In the future, this might be able to be streamed, but it's a pretty big file. In this case, it's 1.6 gigs, and that's zipped. So this is only available for downloading. So I'm going to skip ahead while this downloads so you won't have to watch the tally go through. But I'm almost done here now, 1.4 out of 1.5 gigs, and I'm downloading it to my local device. And of course, what I'm going to do next is same kind of workflow as before. I'm going to copy it from my downloads folder into my working folder. And there's another thing I wanted to point out here. Inside ArcGIS Pro, you can set up a working folder under environments. That's part of the options in ArcGIS Pro. You can set up the working folder. So that might be helpful. It might avoid some of this copying. Well, you'll still need to copy data around, but things in the future that you create, all of the layers that you create, the analysis results will go into that working folder or that environments that you set up on your ArcGIS Pro session. So now I'm going to go ahead and unzip this, the LiDAR data here, and it's quite large, so it, again, takes a while. You'll need to be patient with that. But one of the advantages of having that data on your computer is that you'll be able to do all kinds of things with it in the future in your GIS. So now let's go ahead and in our ArcGIS Pro session, We're in the New Zealand transfers per cater projection here, and we're going to go ahead and add that data in. I'm going to use the Add Data button here, and we're going to go to our working folder. We're going to hit refresh, and I've got a LiDAR folder there. So I've got a whole bunch of LiDAR blocks, and they're in TIFF format. Even though it was just one section of the country, I've got a lot of different individual cells of LiDAR data in there, and I'm going to go ahead and add that data into my project. And I'm going to zoom to layer, and there is my LiDAR data. It's covering an island that's just offshore, as you can see right here. So I'm going to zoom out and see where my other data is in relation to that. It's all in the same projection, which is good. And I'm going to go ahead and add another TIFF. There it is, and that actually covers part of the shore. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get something that's actually on the mainland, if you can call an island a mainland. But now I've got 2 LiDAR pieces of data, and I can start doing some things with it. What can we do with it? Well, this video won't cover all of those things, but for example, what we can do is we can create a hillshade from the LiDAR data. It'll create a different layer, and again, if you set this up in your environments, you can make sure that that hillshade raster file gets written to the same geodatabase in the same working folder. So there's my hillshade right there from the LiDAR data. If I had more time, we would tinker with this a little bit and create maybe a slope and an aspect map. Let's do one more thing though with this. Let's go ahead and look at some of the values. So I'm going to identify, looks like I've got some values here associated with my LiDAR, probably elevation data. So I'm going to go ahead and create some contours from this data. Let's go ahead and run that. It's going to create a layer. I'm going to take the default name, but again, be paying attention to the names that are the default names. If they're suitable, use them. If they're not, you can of course override those data layer names. Excellent. So now the contour process is done, and now I should have some contours. And let's go ahead and turn off the hillshade maybe behind it, and now I can see my contours there. I'm going to turn off the LiDAR data DEM. Great. There's my contour lines. Excellent. So we have downloaded some LiDAR data. We've made a few things, a few derivative products from those, and we're ready to go to a couple of other activities. I hope this is instructive. Again, what we're doing is we're illustrating how to stream and download data for, in this case, New Zealand, but this applies anywhere around the world, and how to bring that data into ArcGIS Pro, and then how to do some spatial analysis with it. Excellent. So to sum up, we've gotten some habitat data, we've gotten some land use data, some NED data, DEM data, LiDAR data, and I'm just turning on and turning off some of those layers so you can see what we've done thus far. Very good. I'm going to save my project because I've added a lot of layers to it, and I've done some processing of the LiDAR data, for example, and that is great. It's looking good. Okay, I've got about 6 layers in here now, and let's turn our attention here in a moment to just a couple of other things that I hope are helpful as you journey forward. Let's go ahead and take a look at a regional council. So this is Taranaki Regional Council. These regional councils are regional governments in New Zealand, and like many regional governments around the world, although open data policies vary from country to country, New Zealand's done a great job of having the regional councils host geospatial data and making it freely available for people to use. And so in this case, I'm going to go ahead and see what kind of data are available. So I could browse through here. Coastal, what do I have there? One layer, it's the coastline, and maybe I don't want that right now. What else do I have available at my fingertips here? How about rivers and catchments? That would be interesting, wouldn't it? You'll see why in a moment. This is one of my favorite areas of the whole world, with the radial pattern of the rivers flowing away from the volcanic peak that is Mount Taranaki here in New Zealand. So fascinating. I can take a look at this in a map viewer that they've got on their site because it's a open data ArcGIS hub site. I can also stream, let's see if we can stream in the data. If we wanted to do that, we could. So if I say open in map viewer, what do I have there? I'm going to open it in my own map viewer in my own ArcGIS Online organizational account, and there it is, and you can see Mount Taranaki there. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. I love this. Look at how those rivers flow away from that peak. That's a beautiful thing. That is physical geography at its finest, folks. Just gives me the geo chills. And I can also take a look at the metadata there, as I am always advising people to do. I also have a URL there. It's a feature server URL because this is a feature service. So now if I'm in ArcGIS Pro, let's go ahead and turn off some of these other layers. One of the other ways to bring data in is right from that feature service. So unlike before when we downloaded, well, we streamed one thing in already in this session, but instead of downloading like we've done most of the time in this session, we're going to add data from path. So let's go ahead and see if that works. And the reason why I say if that works is because depending on how the data is served, there are still sometimes little glitches where data is in a different projection, for example, or it's a table and it's not a feature service. So here, look, I can bring it right into my same session as before. In this case, of course, my data is actually online. So if we looked at the properties, we would see the URL where this is actually streaming from. And we've got the rivers in there now. Nice. And I'm going to go ahead and change the layer properties to say I want to view this layer even if I'm zoomed out at a small scale, to a small scale. So now I can see the rivers, whereas before it would turn off because of the default setting there. So you can see that I've got my other data that is now all overlaid on this river data. Of course, the river data, remember, is for this district, this regional council, the Taranaki Regional Council in New Zealand. So it doesn't cover the whole country, but it's a nice high-resolution river data set with all kinds of attributes that we could explore if we had more time. But it came originally from this open data site in the regional setting, in the regional council. So this is just wonderful. Again, full details. We can look at who created the data, why it was created, and other things. We could also download it from here. Remember, there's no one best way always. We could download it as a CSV, a KML, GeoJSON, shapefile. So if we wanted to go that route, we could. Again, there are reasons to download. There are also valid reasons to stream the data as well. Okay, now just wanted to add a final note here that you can add your own data, of course. That's one of the powers of modern GIS. So for example, if I had a table of latitude, longitude coordinates, for example, I would say I'm going to use the table to point, XY table to point. I've got a XY table on my own device here, and I'm going to go ahead and find that table. And it is called New Zealand Test Points.csv. I've exported it from Excel. My X field is longitude, my Y field is latitude. Of course, all the latitudes are negative numbers because it's the southern hemisphere. So make sure that you've got your proper negative numbers where they need to be in your table. And now I'm going to go ahead and bring in my table of data, and that is my 4 test points in my original Excel table that I've exported to a CSV. Very nice. So we'll take a look at that. Yep, it's in decimal degrees. All good. So some things you can look at. WGS 84, it's latitude, longitude. I haven't projected it to any projected coordinate space. And of course, if you're going to do analysis with data, you want to use a projected coordinate space to make sure that those units and those measurements and everything else you're doing, the analysis results, are accurate. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks.